along the way. Everybody, you're very welcome. Thanks again for coming along. This is, I think, the 13th or 14th LOL session, Learn Over Lunch session, that we've done since we started the Indie List. We're trying to do at least one a month, and I think so far we've done 3 this year, which is great, or maybe just the 4th one, in fact. And today, as you know from the invite list that you've all seen, or the invite that we sent out, the focus today is really on taking a no-nonsense approach to costing and scoping your work, and building also a personal brand. It's something that they're both topics that come up quite a bit in our conversations with people who are thinking of freelancing, who have been freelancing for some time. So people never get tired of kind of getting advice or hearing advice from experts in the area. And we're lucky today, we have 2 of our best indies coming from on both of those topics from different angles. So we're both going to present. Our first presenter will be Jane Devitt. For those of you who don't know Jane has brilliant experience across advertising, digital, brand identity projects, you name it. Jane has virtually, I would say, worked across all aspects of the communications business in the course of her career. She's been part of multidisciplinary teams in global agencies like BBDO, Folk Wonderman Thompson, design agencies as well, so people like Huguenot and Brand Union. And I think, Jane, you've been working kind of freelance, self-employed for the last 10 years.
Self-employed since 2013, so at least I can really talk to you from that point of view, yeah.
And again, the variety of projects that Jane has worked on, again, have been multi-varied. She's also mentoring and has mentored a lot of people in her career. Most recently done a lot of training for IAPI, again, across the industry. And she's also a board member of the DSPCA. We nearly saw her new dog there a couple of minutes ago. And also Sanford Park School. Her co-presenter is Kate O'Moore. Kate is creative director of her own agency, Maker, and winner of the Local Enterprises Women in Business Network Entrepreneur of the Year Awards 2020. She began her career in creative advertising and then set up Maker in 2016 with the ambition to help businesses to succeed with strong visual brand and brand presence as well. She helps brands to thrive through branding and graphic design services that Maker and her team provide. So guys, you're both very welcome. Thanks for taking the time. Thanks for the work that you've done to date on this. And I know from looking at the initial presentation, there's lots of really good, rich content that all of our indies will benefit from. And for all of those who are here, take notes if you like, but Jane and Kate have kindly said that the deck is going to be freely available after this session as well, and we'll make that available to you. So guys, how has the 2022 gone for you so far? We're nearly 3 months into the year. Gone reasonably well?
Yeah, it has. I have actually taken personally, I was in BBDO and Folk Wonderman for nearly 51 weeks of last year. So I'm in the middle of a break, which is fantastic. And so I put money aside. You have to plan for these things. And I'm involved in a lot of, payback kind of work at the moment, which is fine, and doing stuff for boards. So I'm just looking at and defining what I want to do next. So you do need headspace for that as a creative person.
Yeah. Very good. Kate, how about you? How are things going with you?
Things are busy so far this year. There's definitely a pickup in work, definitely when the year turned into 22. I found 21 was a lot of uncertainty with budgets, but there's certainly more direction this year and more confidence in going ahead with projects. So yeah, it's been a good year.
In terms, if I can ask you, just obviously since the crisis in Ukraine, has there been any kind of fallback in work that you've seen the last couple of weeks or whatever? Clients might hold off on that particular project because supply chain issues or whatever the excuse might be?
Not in the industries I'm currently working in, but I know some of my clients provide products to Russia. So they will have to make decisions later down the road if they want to keep doing that. But so far, no, but these things tend to come later. So I imagine the summertime we'll notice the effect of that.
Yeah, very good. Well, look, guys, the floor is yours, or the room is yours. So I'll hand over to you, Jane, or Kate, whoever wants to kick it off. Yeah,
Jane,
welcome everyone. Great to see so many people so many numbers on this. We are looking forward to, has somebody got control of the screen? There we go. Okay. What we're going to cover, I had at the top here what we will cover, but I thought the word will was not a good word to have in any presentation after the Oscars the other night. So it's just down to topics now. Very quickly going to look at geopolitical, the picture at the moment, on how that will affect your clients more down the line than now. Talk about an attitude to quoting, and then we're going to roll into calculating your rates, scoping jobs, just our experience between the two of us. Kate is a younger person in the business, but has built her business. I worked with Kate in Brando in 2014, 2015, and I could even see then how her business was going to build. And she's going to talk about all her successes. Because finance is central to my role, she has a different viewpoint on it, so it'll make for kind of an interesting session. And they're all the different topics we're going to talk about. We're also going to touch on building your personal brand and how you cannot be passive if you want to do that. You have to really move out of your comfort zone and do a lot of additional work in order for people to know who you are and to make sure that you're actually, you know, on the radar. And then obviously getting paid. We'll talk about that toward the end. So the geopolitical backdrop, I think you're very much aware of what that is. I don't need to tell you. We've gone from COVID now into the war in Ukraine, and that's going to have lots of kick-on, knock-on effects, politically and in terms of growth. I heard the other day that growth's to remain static in 2022, so to bear that in mind. You don't need to know all about this. You'll be aware of it from the news, but it will have an impact at some point with your clients. So you just need to have an awareness that projects might be put on hold, budgets could be cut or increased with the marketing director. You just don't know. So just to always have an awareness of what's going on. And there's obviously going to be interruptions to supply chains. That could be a huge thing down the line, and increase on price of goods. Someone told me today Netflix is going up from €14.99 to €20. Thought I'd share that with you. Might not be signing up anymore for that. Sorry guys, just I can't seem to move the screen.
If you try,
there we go. Yeah, I just popped attitude tab. So attitude to quoting. When I say attitude to quoting, this comes from a project management point of view. I know there's a mix of business owners on the link today, self-employed people. There's a lot of designers, web people, people involved in writing. And when I say to you, if you have the right attitude to quoting from the start, you will do a great job and get paid well. So when you get a brief, we're going to talk in a little while about verbal briefs versus writing down a brief. You really have to make sure that you spend time on putting that quote together. It's often the bit of work you don't want to do, especially from a creative point of view. Whereas for me, I get a bit giddy putting a quote together because I always had targets and profit margins to reach when I was in agencies. So I had to get my quote and my scope of work right. It was the first thing that I did. So I think it's just really hugely important that you have that framework going into doing your quote. Take a few hours out, take your coffee, go out into the garden, write down exactly all the things that are going to be part of that piece of work. I was watching the Andy Warhol series there on Netflix, and he was a brilliant businessman. He wasn't a destitute artist at the end of his life. He knew how, as we all know, to replicate his art, but he knew about business. And he actually verbally said in one of the episodes, making money is art and good business is the best art. So really, I understand when you're creative, it's all about the headspace. It's all about research and finding good ideas and letting things come to you. But the importance of putting your quote together is also really, really pertinent. So when I'm approaching a quote, no matter how small or big it is for a client, or if I'm in an agency, I break up all the aspects of the work into descriptive paragraphs. And you really have to do that. You really have to speak it out loud and say, okay, firstly, I'm going to have my briefing session. Then I'm going to come back with a quote and an approach. You can actually cost for that, and if you break that down for a client, they go, she's serious. She knows her business. And a rough example is over here to the right. You will all be doing this anyway. But for those of you who are not, who might say, I can do that piece of design work, that's 2 days work. It's not enough. You need to put in the briefing stage, everything you will do around the first meeting, the briefing, then into the creative development. You will agree with them that you will do 3 outline concepts. You can even describe what they will be, like go into granular detail. And then you're obviously, when they agree on that and they pick one, you will design, develop one across the whole suite, whatever that is. If it's a homepage for a website, if it's across a load of digital formats, and then the finished art. I know that's an old-fashioned phrase, but it's really getting all the elements to delivery and in the agreed formats. So that's a ballpark of the kind of brief that you should have, or the breakdown, but don't be afraid to go into a lot of detail. This is Kate's fabulous slide.
Yeah, so I would say that, Jane, that the benefit of putting a lot of detail in your quote is that you're setting an expectation of what the client can expect, because I'm sure we've all been in a situation where we've set a certain price for a certain job, and then down the road there is scope creep and there is more work anticipated by the client than you intended. So it's important to put detail in your quote for that reason. This is my own personal approach to quoting, which I find works quite well. It's not a formula, it's more so things to consider when you're creating a quote, because there is a lot to consider. I made something easy to remember, this TRAVED. So to consider the time that it's going to take you, whether it's 2 days, 3 days, 5 days, whether it's weekday work or weekend work. And what weekend work is when a client specifically requires you to do it at the weekend. It's not you deciding to do it at the weekend. Are you award winning? Have you any recent accreditations that you can add to your quote that emphasize your value as a creative? What's the value of this project to the client? Because you might think, oh, I'm just creating a label, or but it's not just a label, it's a transformation of that product which will now communicate better, etc. So think about the value of the project to the client, the end client. By experience, I mean your experience in the industry as well as the client's experience with working with designers, and that you can find with smaller businesses. I've come across quite a few small businesses that I work with that haven't worked on a professional level with a graphic designer before. And you need to know that there's a little more hand-holding in that, which is absolutely fine. And I'm sure you're willing to do that too. Just keep in mind that might take more time, more communication. As well as that, the deadline, if there's a tighter deadline, consider that in your pricing. You might charge more if you have to do something quicker. So after you've considered all those points in TRAVED, I want you to step back and review, because you might have come out with a figure that is way beyond the reality of the situation. And as well, just to keep in mind, if there's repeat business in it, would you consider lowering the price to get business, keep getting repeat business? So as I said, it's not necessarily a formula, but it's just things to consider in your quoting.
Perfect, thanks, Kate. We're going to go into talking about calculating rate now and all the different kind of approaches. Some people come onto the market and they think they're just straight out of college, or they've had 1 year working somewhere and they think that they can charge 600 quid a day. You just can't. So we're going to just look at all the different aspects and the different ways that you can arrive at your rate. And it takes a couple of years out there, So conditions of costing, things you need to look at are, have you worked for the client before? Do you know them? Reputation, are they known as good, timely payers? This is very important to understand. If they have a reputation about not paying well, you have to investigate all of those things. What type of budgets have they indicated verbally, and are they kind of real costs, or are they going to come back to you with more detail? Have they given you a written brief? Is it a verbal brief? You've got to pull a written brief out of them, guys, because you're just going to get into so much trouble. A lot of clients go, I don't have time for that. You know, we've all had them. I'll drop you an email, and they give you a 2-liner. And genuinely it is because they're busy, right? So what I would do is, whatever your understanding of what the brief is, you need to write that up in detail back to them and just say, John, dear John, thank you very much for your call. This is my understanding, as Kate was saying, of what the job is. Can you please sign this off? I know this all sounds painful, but it will pay off in the end, and get them to come back to you and go, yes, that's correct. Then the famous question that everyone should ask is the PO. Will you get a PO? Don't let them push you off about this. They go, yeah, I'll get in touch with clients. No, just say, really? To start the work, I need the PO. Now, if you have a good relationship with the client, you know that maybe you'll get it 10 days down the road, and that's fine. But if they're being dodging it a little bit, it's just not good for you, because that will impact on when you get paid. So it's so important to always ask for the PO, or at least get an explanation of when you'll have it, and find out their payment terms. Kate, you were going to talk about you and your business.
Yeah, so something that's incredibly important and has been important to me is to have a really strong terms of service or terms of business. We're going to give you an example of those later and go into that in a little more detail. It's important just to protect yourself, like Jane was saying. If it's a new client, have a line in your terms of service that specifies that situation. So if it is a new client, you require either 50% to start, or you require a PO. Obviously, if you're going through the indie list, that's a kind of a safe financial way of doing business. If there's further work on from that, and you're working with the client or other clients yourself, it's just important to have those things in place just to protect yourself. 50% upfront is very normal, and it's don't be afraid to ask for that. We're more likely to put more effort into it if we're paid, because that means that we're trusting of them and they trust you, and there's that balance between you. As well, it's good to consider upfront how many meetings there's going to be, how regular the communication is going to be. Will you update them weekly? All of these things set that expectation from the client, and then you know how much time is going to be involved, dedicated to speaking with that client. Obviously, things can come up and emails come in, and you have to address those. You're not necessarily charging for those. You're just considering how much time it all adds up.
Yeah, and never think, guys, that you're being too formal. You're not. This is how you are presenting your business-like self. So don't be thinking, oh God, that's too much detail, or am I being too formal? Be as formal as you want to be. They'll know they're dealing with a professional then, and start as you wish to continue. Even if you're 22, 32, 42, or my age, really just understand your value at that time, but start off well as a very business-like person, because I've watched Kate here grow over the past 6 years, and I knew by working with her in Brando she's going to go places because of the meticulous way she approached her work and everything, and that's why I asked her to join me today. So level of experience versus rate. I love this artist, Stephen Heffernan. You may or may not be familiar with him. He's fantastic in terms of his little snapshot on what's going on the day. And I love this, how to make art. As an artist, you think you're great in part and you think you're shit in another part. And it's somewhere in the middle. So you have to be realistic about your experience versus your rate. And kind of just, it becomes an intuitive thing as you're in the business a long time, what you can charge and what you can't. But don't blow yourself out of the water by going in too high. And on the flip side of that, be careful in terms of what you're giving as a.
If I could just that I saw a question there come in, Jane, just about would you seem cocky if you sent someone your list of terms of service? But no, absolutely not.
No,
absolutely not. I mean, we're business. You're a business. We're not here to be just used. We have to protect ourselves in ways so that we can provide a high quality service. I have a full A4 page I'd say 9-point typeface. There's a lot of detail in my terms of service for a reason. With each project, I added a line, and that's just how you protect yourself and how you show you're professional in the way you approach work, for sure.
And to follow on from that point, considerations would be, before you get into putting a quote together for a client, you need to self-reflect. And I think a lot of the younger people coming up, I find they're uber talented. They've got incredible credentials, but it's really important to look at how long have I been in the industry? What types of projects have I actually completed? What type of feedback have I received? What is the market rate for someone of my level? Have I been part of an award-winning team? And look, we know that mightn't happen for another 15 to 20 years in your career, but look at all those things. The last piece of work you did for a client, did it achieve their objectives? Don't be afraid to ask them that question. How did that piece of copy or artwork work for you? And use that feedback to understand how you're improving. Also, have you built a profile for yourself? So you go in with a big quote to a client and they go looking for you. You don't have a website, you've nothing up on LinkedIn, they've nothing live, they've no way of seeing what your work is like. So that's another part of building your personal brand. You have to do all that hard work at the beginning. I have a website, it's very basic, but at least if someone goes looking for me, they understand what I do. And I have a big profile on LinkedIn, and I always update my CV, even though I'm not necessarily going for jobs. So keep all of those things updated. The work you did last week, I'm sure some of you had a tough week writing copy for a website, doing a piece of UX design. Write up what you achieved in doing that work and just keep it to the side, and then understand the kind of projects that you've done. Also, when I write, if I'm writing a covering letter for a piece of work, I often put in links to my most recent work. There's nothing better than that. Otherwise, you're blowing your own trumpet and you've nothing to show for it. So you really have to have the backdrop of all the work that you've done. So just very quickly, in calculating your rate, a rule of thumb, they say you should take the annual income you're trying to achieve divided by the hours worked in the year. So I did a little bit of a number crunch last week on this. Now I know 75 grand is probably high for some of you, but it was just a kind of a middle of the road, or kind of a middle of the road plus kind of salary. You look at taking 50 weeks of that, because 2 weeks would be minus off for unpaid holidays. And roughly that leaves you with 1,500 gross per week, or 300 gross per day, which isn't a massive rate, but that might be the reality of where you're at. It's about 40 euro per hour. Then what I did was I cross-referenced it against the Deloitte tax calculator, which I always find very useful. If people are talking about salaries, you put in, say, 100 grand, that you're a single person, whatever, if you're not a director in a company, and the net income that comes out of that for 75 grand is actually 25 euro an hour after tax, USC and expenses. So it's very good to kind of do those exercises when you're thinking about what you want to make for the year, or how you're going to actually cost things. And for me, going into a year, sometimes this year I went into it a bit deliberately blankly, because I'm trying to get onto the client side, actually, I'll be honest with you, and move away from agency work. So that could take a lot of time. So in order for me to do that, I had to put aside 3 months' salary, basically. And so you have to be able to plan. And if you look at a year, I start my year with a spreadsheet, and I look at all the clients I have, maybe existing ones, old ones, and I plot in roughly what I think I could get from them, even though I don't know what the project is, because sometimes putting that down on paper helps you attract that business, or makes you understand what you have to do to get that. So it's not just going to arrive on your lap. You have to be incredibly proactive. And as we all know, one piece of work leads to another. So just going to chat now about scoping the job. We've kind of gone into this already, but I cannot underline more importantly that when a client says, I just want something simple, I'm just looking for a bit of a, that thing you did last week with the graphic, and that you get those vague briefs, and don't get annoyed by them. Just say, okay, to the client, I'm going to write back again, as I said, what I think, my understanding of the brief, what it is, and write that back to them, get the sign off, and then get into the system of getting the PO. And from a freelancer point of view, in terms of the client, they will think you're all about the business, and they know that you understand the stages and you understand the deliverables. So we're repeating ourselves a bit here by these points, but they're just so important. It's like you're writing the letter for your future work. That's a great way to kind of approach it. Watch outs, free work and pitch work. You will be asked from time to time by a very close friend maybe to go in on a piece of, if you're a designer, could you do the design work and I'll do the words? And you know what, you're going to always have to pitch. It's the nature of business, but you need to judge the pieces that are worth going for, and try and not get involved in too much of it, because it'll be a downward spiral where you're not going to get paid for everything. This no foal, no fee term, I don't like it. It reminds me of being back in the business in the 80s and 90s, where we just have to see how we go, and throwing all this work at people and not getting a response or not getting paid for it. Just, understand your value and make sure that you, where possible, the pitch is worth it, or down the line, you're going to get paid well. And generally, if anyone is saying free work, I just would be kind of moving away from that. Just be really careful, get a definition of what in fact they're actually asking for.
Jane, can I just jump in there and ask a question? What
Sure.
about speculative work?
Okay, well, speculative work, yes, it's the same kind of thing, Una. And speculative work is okay. We all have to do it. We've spent our lives doing it. It's just, and for pitches in agencies, that's what we do all the time. I've never, as a project kind of director, been asked that. So I'm actually, Kate, you could probably answer that question much better, because I'm either needed or I'm not, because it's a project, but I'm never asked actually to do speculative work. So I'm lucky.
Yeah, I have been asked to do this before, and I have done it before. It depends on if you really, really want the job. So I've done it before for jobs that I thought would really transform my business by gaining this client, and it did pay off. So for this particular client, I pitched 5 times and got 3 pieces of work. So those 2 times were worth not getting, just to kind of learn from them and then be a bit more successful. I don't take on every one of those that comes in, because I need to really ask myself, is this really worth 3 days for me to take out of my work? If the answer is yes, if it's all yes, then I would do the effort, consider it business development. If it's a job that you just kind of feel obliged to do and you don't really like the work further on, I'd really consider whether you wanted to be part of that or not. So ask yourself, is it worth taking that time out if you didn't get it? That's kind of the question.
That's a very good approach. And actually, it's only something you build up your intuition on year after year of working for yourself. So don't expect to have that at the beginning. And I think when you're starting out, you should probably go for a fair bit of work, speculative work, because it will help build your experience as well. I think when you get to a higher level, it's a different kind of game. But at the start, you may need to do a little bit of it. But that's a good way to approach it, Kate.
Yeah, it depends. It really depends.
Yeah,
on if it's worth it. So like I mentioned before, the terms of service are incredibly important. I'm going to kind of give you a breakdown of what I put into it, and it's really saved both the relationship and just yourself, both in terms of having that strong sense, a strong document of terms of service. Jane, would you mind going back one page, please?
Sorry, it moved on. And it's hard to kind of go back out. There we go.
Yeah, perfect. So as I said, this is all in the 1 A4 page that I put with every single quote that I put out. Even clients who I work with all the time, it goes with every quote, because it's just there to be read. It's there for you to be taken seriously. So be very specific in your terms. That's I have a friend who is a solicitor, and she said to me, if you just say, did you agree to the terms of service? It's not enough. You have to say, an agreement is when So by proceeding with your quote, i.e. when you respond to this email, positively, or the receipt of content by me, you are agreeing to these terms of service. So be very specific about what is agreeing to them. So first of all, copyright, which is important for all creatives. So what level, you need to decide what level of copyright does the client have, specifically what content do they have, is it the images, is it the copywriting piece. So if you look up Copyright and Related Rights Act 2000, it's quite a lengthy piece, but you'll find quotes in there that you can put in that are relevant to you. I have a few of these in there, and it states that I have copyright over all artwork unless specifically the client gets this in writing, which can happen sometimes. The client might want copyright over it, and then you can charge them for the release of that copyright. So payment and invoicing is the next heading I have. So what are your terms, as in how many days should you be paid? Again, it's slightly different with the indie list. They have a very efficient payment cycle, but in terms of outside of that, you need to determine when you're going to be paid, whether it's 30 days, 60 days. I'd recommend 30 days. It's enough of a cycle for accounts teams to get you paid. So again, the invoicing schedule. What do you expect before work begins? So that's either a PO number or 50%. So a PO number is like a guarantee from an accounts team that money is going to be paid. So a PO number is quite valuable. I find them even more valuable sometimes than getting paid up front, because it's kind of a guarantee that you're going to get it. But, cash is king. So get 50% in if you can. And also have some rules about what happens if the invoice isn't paid on time. So is there an extra fee for that? What happens if it goes over 30 days? Typically, you might say you'll get a reminder email at 30 days, at 35 days, at 40 days. If it's not paid after this time, what's the consequence of that? Exclusions, what's not included in your quote. It could be, you can include a certain amount of changes, and what happens after that, or the cost of printing. If you're doing design work or business cards, it doesn't include the cost of that. So the responsibility of information and content, this is quite an important one, and it's how you, again, keep your formality in a situation, especially if the relationship is getting better and better with the client, and you can see more of a friendship. It is really good just to have this in your terms of service. So example, who's responsible for final proofreading? I always say the client in that, because it's their content. I don't create the written content. I'm not a copywriter, I'm a designer. So they have to be responsible for final proofing. Also, it's really important to state the ethics around your image sourcing. So if the client provides images to you, they are responsible for the licensing of that images, and vice versa. If you provide the images, that you're responsible for the license on those images. And just, I suppose, whoever is purchasing them is responsible for that. And it might seem like over detail, but these have gone into my terms of service for a reason. And it's because things have come up that have caused, that needed clarification and things like that. So these are just, I suppose, all lessons learned throughout the years I've gone into this terms of service. So how many rounds of changes are included? Typically there's 3, and that's what a client might expect, but then how much extra does it cost outside of scope? And that's why, as Jane was saying, it's really, really important to clarify your scope in your quotations, so that you can raise your hand and say, okay, we are now out of scope, therefore it's going to be this charge. And I've done that so many times. You have to remove the personal side of yourself out of the situation and become the business face. You really have to just do that. You have to say, okay, well, now we're out of scope. And you having a really clear scope in the beginning helps you further along. I saw a question in the group, in the chat there, about, you know, if someone comes back to you after the project's finished, put that in your terms of service as well. So I have I think I call it a reopening file fee. So if after 12 months the project has gone on and everything, they know that if they come back, there's €100 fee for me to open the file and to make changes after that. So it's just good to have all that in writing, so that you're not kind of sitting there thinking, oh, how much will I charge for this? Or I feel bad charging for that. It's just one thing. But, you know, if we did 51 things in one day, we're wasting our time and we're not getting paid for that. So just have a think about that. And then anything else that's specific that you've learned along the way, really, your terms of service will keep growing, and mine does. You know, I keep learning. It's kind of a never ending, but these are just the main headings for you to start off. And just be really specific about everything is what I would say.
Kate, I think that level of detail, though, is so important. And guys, that page to me will be so helpful for you, I think, moving forward. And just that whole, there's an Irish thing sometimes about, oh no, well, I'm not really worth it, or that seems like a lot of additional detail that'll annoy the client. It won't. You can be sure that they have their terms and conditions also. So come away from this session with that kind of confidence that all of this will be useful. And Kate, you're going to do this one as well.
Yeah, so retainer work is a great way to have that regular income in your business. There's pros and cons to retainer work. And what I would say is be very aware of the expectations of the client. So what they expect from the project, and be very upfront about your expectations as well. Sometimes I was working on a retainer project and I hadn't investigated the client expectation of the retainer. And in reality, they expected a report at the end of every day and a call every 2 days, which was way too much of my time that I hadn't quoted for. And it was very micromanagement that I hadn't expected. So if I was going back into retainer work, I'd really be looking for the expectation of the client, both in terms of time working together and communication. And have everything in writing. You know, if you have a phone call, make an email after that and say, as per our phone call. This all might seem like very basic tips, but it's so important, especially if things go wrong further down the line. You need to you have that paper trail of what was expected and what was delivered, etc. So do have everything in writing.
Yeah, and it really helps you. It just makes your life so much easier. Okay, guys, we're going to go through the next 2 points and then we'll be open to Q&A. So building your personal brand and putting a value on that is so important. I suppose through the years, a lot of people would have said to me, Jane, how did you get that gig from such and such a person or that piece of business? And it wasn't just out of the blue. I was always what I would call proactively dynamic in everything that I did in the kind of central part of my career, where I would pick up the phone all the time, keep in touch with people, talk to other people in the business. I was always writing online pieces to be informed about the industry, to try and have my own view on things and get it out there. Always networking. I went to as many things as I could, opening of envelopes, kind of situations in my 20s and 30s, but it pays off. Share of mind is a huge thing. Just people understanding who you are and that you're on the radar for a reason. Not that you're just appearing at things, but that you're actually, participating and engaging. I've met random people for coffee that some people might go, why did you meet that person? And I've got business out of it. So I'll give you an example. I went for a cup of coffee a couple of years ago with actually an old friend of mine that I knew from my 20s. I was now in my early 40s, and he was saying, where are you working now, Jane? I explained I was working in DMA, and he said, tell me a bit about them. So I started talking about DMA, what we did. It was Direct Marketing Associates. And he said, I'm not pitching. He worked for Colliers. He said, we are pitching for a big communications piece for Bridgewater Shopping Centre. I have 2 people already doing the work on it, Jane. Pitch for this pitch in 2 weeks. You'd be coming in a week late. Do you want to do it? I took it back to the office to Mark, and between the 2 of us and the creative team, we put the pitch together. We did a really comprehensive job. We worked over 2 weekends. We got the businesses worth 600,000 in terms of turnover. That included a bit of media, but it was a huge piece of business. That was from a random cup of coffee. So everything that you gain in your life could come from left of center field, as I call it, not the way you think it's going to be. It could be based on a conversation. Always be known as the person to go to the extra mile, really completing projects well. Get involved in awards and committees where you can. I'm involved. Jesus, my last involvement was on with James's school for the Debs committee. Never again. I collected all the money. I nearly lost my life. Like, I put up my hands too often. And if you look at my personality type, it's an ENFJ, which is the helper. And just sometimes you have to keep your hand down for certain things, but do get involved in other things. Another thing I would recommend you do is get feedback from friends and colleagues at all times. Always be talking to your friends when you're out, so that you can define through them how they perceive you and the things that you're good at. Because sometimes when we're working on our own, we're in an empty vessel and you forget what you're good at, so it's really important to get that feedback from colleagues, friends, and possibly clients that you work with as well. Digicel on the right. I'm going to let Kate take over on a fantastic example on Connolly's. I'll just explain about Digicel. I got a call when I was in Huguenot one night at 9 o'clock in the evening from Peter Lloyd. I always use this example. And he said, hi, Jane, we heard Huguenot were great at doing design. I have a brief. Could you sell me? I'd pull the car over. Could you sell me what Huguenot do? So again, on the phone, pulled over in the car, I did a rundown of what Huguenot does. We got a brief the following week. It was a test brief for a week. We did a lovely piece of work with the most amazing designers in Huguenot. We won a huge piece of business, basically. It was the rebrand of Digicel, or a brand refresh in 2011. But again, that's because I picked up the phone. I could have, not picked up the phone. He might have rung another agency. So try and understand when these unusual opportunities come up. They're rare, but they do come up. With IAPI, Peter had touched on the point that I did a bit of client services training, which I did back in 2020. I went to Charlie Stoney. She didn't come to me. I went to her and I said, Charlie, I have an idea. I'm seeing a few gaps with my account managers. I'd love to cover off this, this, and this. So I wrote up a couple of decks. And I think out of that came her more formal alignment with TUD, where they have a, full training going on. So again, that was all just proactively suggesting to her, because also I wanted to generate business. Heyday.ie is a fantastic online subscription mag from a lady called Ellie Balfe, who puts together, a lot of you may be familiar with her, who puts together this most amazing content. She was, I think, an editor in Image now. And because I used to talk to her a little bit on Instagram about her pieces and the articles she had up, we're doing a collaboration on something else. So everything is an opportunity. And Kate, do you want to tell them about Connolly's, which I didn't even know about till you told me this morning?
Yeah, actually, so I was working with Jane, and when I left Brando, I just messaged Jane on LinkedIn, and it was kind of, I think it was just a kind of a how are you message, because we had a good relationship and we were working together. And I think later that day, Jane, you were speaking to your friend who worked in Connolly's, who needed a graphic designer. And 6 years later, I still work with Connolly's and are a huge client of mine. So you just never know where a conversation can bring you. Sometimes what I have done is really stuck my neck out, and I know that feels uncomfortable, but you just never know. I emailed Board BIA one day and I said, hey, I'd love to work with you. And you think, oh God, they're never even going to reply. In 2 days from sending that email, I was standing in front of them, presenting them my entire portfolio. And I thought I was going in for a coffee, and there was 6 of them waiting in the boardroom for me, waiting for me to present. So always be prepared with a deck. Don't assume it's a coffee.
Yeah,
I was glad I was prepared. I had a deck with me, and it was a lot more formal than I expected. So always have a deck in your back pocket that you can pull out. That would be my tip, definitely.
That is a great tip, because it was the same with me on that Bridgewater meeting. It was a coffee, but I had the laptop, and then I went through what we did at the EMA. So if you're in a constant selling mode, and I guess I'm a salesperson at my heart, but a people person, I love meeting people. And it's always through those connections that, sure, look at us presenting today. That's because we know Peter and Una, and I've always had a long lasting relationship with Una through the years, and the same with Peter. So it's all about, and I think I suggested maybe that I help with doing this. So keep looking at the opportunities. You have to build your brand. And I look at more of the other people out there, a lot of younger people, and I do laugh. I do go, marketing has changed in a way. And this is where I just want to talk a little bit about avoiding, what to avoid when building your brand. So I see a lot of the box opening influencers. It's a whole new thing, isn't it? When you have your 250,000 followers, and then you get sent all these products, then you promote products. It is a whole new world, and it's kind of interesting, but it's kind of like the value of that. A lot of those people, some of them are in their 30s and in their 40s, and they've really built up their reputation within a PR way, and then they deserve to have that kind of following. And then there's some of them that it kind of does make me laugh. It's a little bit flimsy to me. Working in a bubble as well isn't good, because you're in an echo chamber. Working alone is hard, so it's very important to get feedback from people outside of you all the time, and also having a realistic estimation of, who you are, and what you have achieved. Be honest with yourself. Like, I know I'm not necessarily a strategist, but I certainly am a very good project director. I certainly am good at mentoring people. I want to look after people at all times, So it's just being really aware of all of that. Comparative thinking is a bad thing, guys. You can't be comparing yourself to other people, because it's a stealer of joy. There's always going to be people that seem to be doing better than you, but don't compare yourself. You are you. You've got your own way of doing things. Everyone has their unique little patch. So don't be into comparative thinking. It could set you into a terrible spiral of negativity. So just look at all the good things you have. Don't believe in shortcuts. There are none. I think there are times when preparedness meets opportunity, and things segue really well, but that's because you're prepared. People who think that they're shortcuts, they usually end up a little bit at the bottom of the barrel. That's all I would say. I think there are times when you can have shortcuts in business, but they're far and few between. So always, you have to go in and you have to go through the hard work, like doing your quote at the beginning and getting all that detail down, like writing up your terms of business, like noting all the work you've done the previous month or two and making sure you've written that up and added it into your CV. You're continuously building. So they're the things I would say avoid doing. Get involved in kind of real work. And then just to finish off on getting paid, guys, Kate and I are very happy to say we have been paid 100% for all our jobs, bar none. So I think that speaks volumes in terms of itself. You just should never have an unpaid invoice or never not be paid. It's just not acceptable. So, and it's through very good terms of service. And Kate, if you want to take them through this is some good points from you.
Again, I know I'm repeating myself, but having that terms of service and specific quote in the beginning really just sets the tone of how you do business. You are a business and you should be paid. So just, don't think you're just, oh, I'm just Kate doing this. No, I'm a business and I deserve to be paid. It's good to understand the client's payment system. You know, some of my clients have a 28-day cycle, some have a 40-day cycle, and you know, you can't be kind of demanding in the middle of that saying, oh well, I'm only 30 days, but you know, you just kind of have to get to know their payment systems, you know, when you should get your invoice in, so it's not just a day before they do their payments, so you're not waiting a whole month again. And you just ask that question directly, just say, what's the best date to send in my invoices to you? Even I'm sure Una and Peter and Amanda can help you with that as well, in terms of the best way to send in invoices to the Indie List. Make sure you do get your invoices in. I know Una mentioned that it's always good to get your invoice in immediately after the project's finished, after everything has been signed off, so that the process can happen and the payment cycle can go through and you can get paid properly.
Exactly. Yeah, we always try and, you know, get invoices in quickly so that we can get freelancers paid as fast as possible, because we understand that it is a pain point for people. We'll fight really hard to make sure that our terms with our clients, which is 2 weeks from, you know, payment within 2 weeks of receipt of invoice, to make sure that that is happening in as far as we can. Now, there are some times when clients just really, you know, don't play ball with us, but you know, we are always trying to be out there flying the flag for freelancers. We